The smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon filled every corner of Humboldt, Nevada, except for the dimly lit Silver Spur Saloon, where Penelope Nash wiped down the same sticky bar top for the third time that evening. Through the frosted windows, she could see families hurrying past with packages wrapped in brown paper and red ribbon, their laughter muffled by the thick glass that separated her world from theirs. Christmas Eve of 1882 had arrived with all its promise and joy for everyone but her, and she felt the weight of that exclusion settle deep in her chest as she watched the oil lamps flicker to life in the homes across the dusty street. "Another whiskey, Miss Nash," a grizzled miner called from the corner table, his words already slurring together despite the early hour. The handful of men scattered throughout the saloon had nowhere else to be either, their own circumstances leaving them stranded on this night when most decent folk gathered with family. Penelope grabbed the bottle from behind the bar, her fingers aching from the cold that seeped through the poorly insulated walls. At 22, she had expected something different from life than serving drinks to lonely men while the rest of the world celebrated. Her dark hair hung in a practical braid down her back, and her brown dress, though clean, had been mended so many times the original fabric barely showed through the patches. She had arrived in Humboldt 3 years ago after her parents died of fever in California, following whispered promises of work and opportunity in the Nevada mining towns. The reality had been far less glamorous. "That will be 10 cents, she said, setting the glass down with perhaps more force than necessary. The miner fumbled with his coins, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he counted out the payment. The saloon owner, Marcus Trent, had made it clear when he hired her that holidays meant nothing in his establishment. "Money does not take a day off, and neither do you," he had said, his thin lips barely moving as he spoke. "You want to keep this job, you work when I say you work." She had nodded then, grateful for any employment, but 3 Christmases had passed since, each one spent in this same smoky room while church bells rang in the distance and carolers sang of peace and goodwill. The door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid December air along with a cowboy she had never seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled his heavy canvas coat, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Snow dusted his dark hair and the brim of his hat, which he removed as he stepped inside, revealing eyes the color of summer sky even in the dim lamplight. He looked around the nearly empty saloon with an expression that suggested he found the whole scene rather amusing. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed at odds with the temperature outside. He made his way to the bar, his boots leaving wet prints on the sawdust-covered floor. "Did not expect to find anywhere open tonight." "We are always open," Penelope replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "What can I get you? Coffee if you have it. Been riding since dawn and I am frozen clear through." He settled onto one of the wooden stools, resting his forearms on the bar. "Name is Lucas Vaughn. Just got hired on at the Triple R Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Penelope Nash." She turned to the small stove in the corner where a pot of coffee sat, probably burnt by now but still hot. "The Triple R is good land. You are lucky they took you on. Lucky is one word for it. I have been drifting for a while now, picking up work where I could find it. When old man Rutherford offered me a permanent position, I figured it was time to settle down somewhere." Lucas accepted the cup she poured him, wrapping his hands around it gratefully. "Though I have to admit, I did not expect to spend my first Christmas Eve in Humboldt sitting in a saloon." "Makes 2 of us," Penelope said before she could stop herself. She immediately busied herself with straightening bottles that did not need straightening, embarrassed by the admission. Lucas studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful rather than intrusive. You would rather be somewhere else. It was not a question, and Penelope found herself answering honestly. I would rather be anywhere else, but the owner does not believe in closing for holidays, and I need this job. She met his eyes, expecting to see pity there, but instead found only understanding. I know something about difficult choices, Lucas said quietly. He took a sip of the coffee, grimaced slightly at the burnt taste, but drank it anyway. Left my family ranch in Wyoming 5 years ago after my older brother made it clear there was not room for both of us. Been working cattle drives, breaking horses, doing whatever needed doing ever since. This is my first real chance at putting down roots again. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed her own, that made Penelope pause in her work. She found herself wanting to know more about this stranger who had wandered in from the snow. Wyoming is a long way from here. Do you have anyone expecting you tonight? Not a soul. Lucas smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. I planned to hole up in my room at the boarding house with a book and call it a night. But when I saw the light on here, I figured even a burnt cup of coffee was better than my own company. The coffee is terrible, Penelope admitted, surprising herself with the almost laugh that escaped. I would not blame you if you left. I have had worse. Besides, the company more than makes up for it. This time his smile was genuine, and Penelope felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. The miner in the corner called for another drink, breaking the moment. Penelope attended to him and the few other customers, but she found her attention drifting back to Lucas, who sat patiently at the bar, nursing his awful coffee and occasionally glancing toward the window where snow had begun to fall in earnest. You should get back before the storm gets worse, Penelope said when she returned. The boarding house is a good 15-minute walk from here. Probably right. Lucas made no move to leave, instead fishing a few coins from his pocket. How much do I owe you? 5 cents. She took the money, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact sent a surprising warmth through her cold hands. Lucas stood, settling his hat back on his head. Miss Nash, I know we just met, and this might be forward of me, but I do not like the idea of you spending Christmas Eve alone in this place. Would you allow me to come back tomorrow if you are working? I could bring something to make the day a bit less dreary. Penelope wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from the disappointment that seemed inevitable whenever she let herself hope for anything better. But something in Lucas's earnest expression made her hesitate. I will be here from noon until closing. Mr. Trent gives me the mornings off on holidays, as if that makes up for missing the actual celebration. Then I will see you tomorrow at noon. Lucas tipped his hat to her. Merry Christmas, Miss Nash. Merry Christmas, Mr. Vaughn. She watched him disappear into the snowy night. And for the first time in 3 years, Christmas did not feel quite so heavy on her shoulders. The rest of the evening crawled by with agonizing slowness. The miners eventually stumbled out into the cold, leaving Penelope alone to clean up the mess they had made. Marcus Trent appeared briefly to collect the day's earnings, counting every coin twice before grunting his approval and disappearing back to wherever he spent his evenings. By the time Penelope locked the door behind her and made her way to the tiny room she rented above the general store, it was nearly midnight. The town lay quiet under its blanket of fresh snow, the celebrations having moved indoors hours ago. Penelope could see lamplight glowing in windows, could imagine families gathered around tables laden with food, children finally asleep after hours of anticipation. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her feet aching and her dress smelling of tobacco smoke and spilled whiskey. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small dresser and a washstand, but it was hers. She had tried to make it homely with a faded quilt her mother had made and a few wildflowers she pressed between the pages of her only book, a volume of poetry someone had left behind at the saloon. She lit the stub of a candle and changed into her nightgown, the cold making her fingers clumsy with the buttons. As she lay in bed, pulling the thin blankets up to her chin, Penelope found her thoughts returning to Lucas Vaughn. She had learned not to trust easily, not after 3 years of dealing with men who saw a woman alone as an invitation. But there had been something different about him, something in the way he spoke to her as though her thoughts and feelings mattered. It was probably foolish to look forward to seeing him again. He would likely forget his promise, swept up in whatever the ranch had planned or finding better company elsewhere. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with snow and blue eyes and a warmth she had not felt in far too long. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow with almost blinding intensity. Penelope used her free morning to attend the late service at the small wooden church on the edge of town. She slipped into the back pew, her best dress, navy blue with only 2 patches, carefully pressed. The hymns washed over her, familiar and bittersweet, reminding her of Christmases when her parents were alive and the world had seemed full of possibility. After the service, she walked slowly back through town, noting the closed shops and quiet streets. Most families were home enjoying their holiday meals. Her own breakfast had been a piece of bread and some cheese, eaten standing at her window while watching the town wake up. The saloon would not open until noon, but she had learned to arrive early to prepare for the day. She let herself in through the back door, grimacing at the lingering smell of stale alcohol. The stove had gone cold overnight, and she set about building a new fire, her hands practiced at the task. She swept the floors, wiped down the tables and bar, and checked the bottles to see what would need restocking. The work was mindless, allowing her thoughts to wander. At precisely noon, she unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. The street outside remained mostly empty, though a few hardy souls braved the cold to make their way to various destinations. She did not expect much business today, which was probably why Marcus had agreed to let her have the morning. The real money came on the days leading up to Christmas, when men spent their wages on liquid courage before going home to their families. She was washing glasses when the door opened. Lucas Vaughn stepped inside, his arms full of packages wrapped in cloth. He was grinning like a man who had just won a horse race. "Merry Christmas," he said, kicking the door shut behind him. "I hope you do not mind, but I took your situation as a personal challenge." Penelope stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You came back. I said I would, did not I?" He made his way to the bar, setting down his bundles with exaggerated care. "Now, I figured if you could not leave this place, I would bring Christmas to you instead. I might have gotten a bit carried away at the general store this morning." "The general store is closed on Christmas," Penelope said, confused. "Old Mr. Henderson lives above his shop, same as you. I knocked on his door at what he informed me was an absolutely unreasonable hour, but once I explained what I needed, he was happy to help." Lucas began unwrapping the packages. "First, real coffee, because what you served me last night was an insult to coffee beans everywhere." Despite herself, Penelope laughed. "I warned you it was terrible. You did indeed." He produced a small bag of coffee beans, the rich aroma immediately noticeable even from where Penelope stood. "Second, because no Christmas is complete without something sweet, I have cookies. Miss Henderson apparently made them yesterday, and her husband was willing to part with a dozen for what I am sure was an outrageous price. He set a tin on the bar, opening it to reveal perfectly golden sugar cookies dusted with cinnamon. Penelope felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had done something kind for her without expecting anything in return? Mr. Vaughn, I do not know what to say. Lucas, please. And you do not have to say anything. He continued unpacking. I also got some decent bread, real butter, and some cheese that does not look like it is growing things. Henderson told me you probably have not had a proper meal today, and I could not stand the thought of that. The simple kindness of it, the care he had taken, overwhelmed her. Penelope found herself blinking back tears, which was ridiculous. She had survived 3 lonely Christmases without crying, but this gesture from a near stranger threatened to undo her completely. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas paused, meeting her eyes with that same earnest expression from the night before. "Because I know what it is like to feel alone on a day when everyone else is together. Because you looked so sad last night it about broke my heart. And because I wanted to." He smiled softly. "Is that reason enough?" Penelope nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as Lucas took over her small kitchen area, brewing fresh coffee with the competence of someone who had spent years cooking over campfires. He laid out the food on the bar like a proper feast, and when he poured 2 cups of coffee, the smell alone was enough to make her close her eyes in appreciation. "This is too much," she finally managed. "You spent your own money, your own Christmas morning." "My Christmas morning was going to be boring as all hell," Lucas interrupted gently. "This is much better, trust me. Now sit down and eat something. You look like you could use a good meal." They sat together at the bar, and Penelope could not remember the last time food had tasted so wonderful. The bread was fresh and soft, the butter creamy, the cheese sharp and flavorful. The cookies were perfection, sweet and spiced just right, and the coffee was revelation, rich and smooth without the burnt bitterness she had grown accustomed to. "Tell me about California," Lucas said between bites. "You said you came here from there." Penelope found herself talking, the words coming easier than they had in years. She told him about growing up in a small farming community outside Sacramento, about her father's smile and her mother's singing. She told him about the fever that swept through one summer, taking both her parents within days of each other. She told him about selling everything to pay for their burials and the debts they had left behind, about following rumors of work to Nevada with nothing but a single bag and desperate hope. Lucas listened without interrupting, his attention never wavering. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." "I do not feel strong, I feel tired. They are not mutually exclusive." He refilled her coffee cup. "Strong people get tired too. They just keep going anyway." "What about you?" Penelope asked, wanting to shift the focus away from her own melancholy story. "You said you left Wyoming because of your brother." Lucas leaned back on his stool, his expression growing distant. "My father built our ranch from nothing, spent his whole life making it successful. When he died 2 years ago, he left it to my older brother James, as expected. James and I never got along, even as kids. He made it clear pretty quickly that he did not want me there, that he saw me as competition or a threat or just a reminder that he had not been our father's only son. So I left. That must have been hard. It was. That ranch was my home. But I learned something important those first few months on the trail. Home is not just a place. It is a feeling, and you can find it in unexpected places." He met her eyes. "Sometimes you find it sitting in a half-empty saloon on Christmas Day with someone who understands what it is like to be alone." The connection between them felt tangible, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fresh coffee or the stove burning in the corner. Penelope realized with a start that she was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The afternoon passed in a blur of easy conversation and comfortable silences. A few customers drifted in and out, drawn by the open sign, but business remained slow. Lucas helped her serve drinks, his natural friendliness putting even the most taciturn miners at ease. He told stories about his years on the trail, about ornery cattle and stubborn horses, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Penelope shared her own stories, smaller but no less meaningful. She told him about the regular customers who treated her with respect, about the satisfaction of running the saloon efficiently despite Marcus Trent's neglect, about her small room and the pressed flowers in her poetry book. As the winter sun began to set, painting the snow outside in shades of pink and gold, Lucas stood and stretched. "I should probably head back to the ranch. Rutherford will wonder where I disappeared to on my first full day of employment." Penelope felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it surprised her. "Of course, thank you for today. It was the best Christmas I have had in years." "Mine too." Lucas pulled on his coat, then hesitated. "Miss Nash, Penelope, would it be all right if I came back? Not just today, but regularly?" "I find myself quite taken with your company." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "I would like that very much. Tomorrow is my day off. Could I take you to dinner? Somewhere nicer than this saloon if you are free. I work tomorrow evening, but I have the afternoon." She could not keep the smile from her face. "There is a restaurant on Main Street that stays open most days. The one run by that Swedish couple. I saw it yesterday. How about 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock, Penelope agreed, feeling as though she might float away. Lucas tipped his hat to her, that now familiar gesture that made her stomach flip. "Until tomorrow, then." After he left, Penelope stood at the window watching his figure disappear into the twilight. Behind her, the saloon felt warmer somehow, less oppressive. The rest of her shift passed quickly, and when she finally locked up for the night, she found herself humming one of the hymns from church that morning. In her small room, she took extra care preparing for bed, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow. She knew she should be cautious, should protect herself from potential disappointment. But something about Lucas felt different, felt real in a way that made her want to take the risk. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, her dreams no longer lonely. The next afternoon, Penelope stood in front of her tiny mirror, trying for the third time to arrange her hair in a way that looked presentable. Her hands shook slightly with nervousness as she pinned the dark waves into a simple style at the nape of her neck. She had exactly 2 dresses suitable for going out, and she had chosen the navy blue one again, brushing it carefully and wishing it were not quite so patched and faded. The restaurant Lucas had suggested was the nicest establishment in Humboldt, run by Anders and Ingrid Nilsson, who had emigrated from Sweden a decade ago. Penelope had walked past it countless times but never imagined actually eating there. The prices, while reasonable, were beyond her tight budget. She arrived a few minutes early, her stomach a knot of anticipation and anxiety. Lucas was already there, waiting outside despite the cold. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair neatly combed and his shirt pressed. When he saw her, his whole face lit up in a way that made her feel beautiful despite her shabby dress. "You look wonderful," he said, offering his arm. "You are too kind," Penelope replied, but she took his arm, enjoying the solid warmth of him beside her. Inside, the restaurant was cozy and warm, smelling of bread and roasting meat. Ingrid Nilsson greeted them with a wide smile, showing them to a small table near the window. The place was only half full, the post-holiday lull evident, but the atmosphere remained cheerful. "I have been thinking about you," Lucas said once they had ordered, his directness catching Penelope off guard. Wondering how someone as clearly intelligent and capable as you ended up working for a man who does not appreciate either quality. Penelope traced the rim of her water glass, considering her answer. When I first arrived in Humboldt, I had no experience, no connections, and no money. Marcus Trent was the only person willing to hire me. I know he takes advantage, paying me less than I am worth and working me harder than he should. But without his job, I would have nothing. You could find other work. Could I? She met his eyes. What would you suggest? The few respectable positions available go to women with families in town, women with reputations and references. I am alone, working in a saloon. That is not exactly the kind of background that opens doors. Lucas frowned, clearly troubled. That does not seem fair. It is not fair. But it is reality. Penelope softened her tone. I do not mean to sound bitter. I am grateful to have work at all, even if it means spending every holiday serving drinks while everyone else celebrates, at least until yesterday. Yesterday was good, Lucas agreed, his expression warming. Best Christmas I have had in years, and I meant what I said. You made it special. Their food arrived, and Penelope had to suppress a small sound of pleasure at the sight of actual roasted chicken with potatoes and vegetables. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a meal she had not prepared herself from the cheapest ingredients available. This is too expensive, she protested weakly. Let me worry about that. I want to do this. Lucas served himself, then looked at her seriously. I have been alone for 5 years, Penelope. 5 years of temporary jobs in temporary places, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. When Rutherford offered me a permanent position, I thought that was what I needed. A place to stay, steady work. But yesterday, talking with you, I realized what I really need is connection. Someone to share things with. Penelope's throat tightened. We have only just met. I know. And I am not asking for promises or declarations. I just want you to know that I see you. Not the woman serving drinks, not the girl who lost everything. I see Penelope, who loves poetry and presses wildflowers and keeps going even when everything feels impossible. That is the person I want to know better. She had to look away, blinking hard. Lucas, too much, he sounded concerned. I tend to speak my mind. My mother always said it would get me in trouble. No, it is not too much. Penelope met his eyes again, deciding to take her own risk. It is just that no one has ever spoken to me that way before, like I matter. You do matter. You matter to me, and I have only known you 2 days. Imagine how much you will matter in a week, a month, a year. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the conversation. Lucas told her more about the Triple R Ranch, about the horses he would be working with, and the other cowboys he had met. Rutherford ran a good operation, treating his men fairly and paying decent wages. Lucas had his own small cabin on the property, simple but solid, with a stove and a real bed. It is the first place that has felt like mine in years, he admitted. I stayed up late last night just sitting in it, enjoying the quiet and the privacy. That sounds wonderful, Penelope said wistfully. Where do you live? Above the saloon? No, thank goodness. I rent a room above the general store. It is tiny, barely big enough to turn around in, but Mr. Henderson keeps it clean and does not bother me. After dealing with customers all day, I need a space that is just mine, even if it is small. I understand that. Privacy becomes precious when you have so little of it. Lucas paused. What do you do on your days off? I assume you get some time to yourself. Half a day on Sundays plus Monday mornings. Usually I wash my clothes, buy supplies, try to rest. It is not much time for anything else. She hesitated, then continued. I have been saving money, a little bit each week when I can. Someday I would like to have choices. Maybe open a small business of my own, something respectable. A bakery, perhaps, or a dress shop. Something that would let me use my hands and my mind without spending every holiday alone. That is a good dream. How close are you? Penelope laughed, though it held little humor. Not very. After paying for my room and food and the few necessities I need, there is not much left. At the rate I am saving, I might have enough in 10 or 15 years. That is too long. Lucas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You deserve better than that. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm. Life rarely gives us what we deserve. We get what we get and make the best of it. Maybe, but sometimes life surprises us. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. 2 days ago, I thought I would be spending Christmas alone in a boarding house. Instead, I spent it with the most interesting woman I have met in years. That was a pretty good surprise. They finished their meal, lingering over coffee and a shared slice of apple pie that Ingrid Nilsson insisted they try. The afternoon light faded outside, and Penelope realized with a start that she needed to get to the saloon soon for her evening shift. I have to go, she said reluctantly. I am supposed to open at 6. I will walk you. Lucas paid their bill despite Penelope's protests, then helped her into her worn coat. Outside, the temperature had dropped further, and their breath formed clouds in the air. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, neither wanting the afternoon to end. When they reached the saloon, Lucas pulled her gently to the side, away from the door. Can I see you again? I know you work most evenings, but maybe I could come by on your next day off. We could go for a walk, or I could show you the ranch if you want. I would love that. Penelope smiled up at him. I have Sunday afternoon free. Would that work? Perfectly. Lucas looked like he wanted to say more, his eyes searching her face. Finally, he leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gentle touch that somehow felt more intimate than anything else. Until Sunday, then. And I will probably stop by before then, if you do not mind. I find I've grown rather fond of terrible saloon coffee when you are the one serving it. Penelope laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. The coffee is still terrible. Yes, but the company makes it worthwhile. She watched him walk away before letting herself into the saloon, her fingers touching the spot on her forehead where his lips had been. The evening stretched ahead of her, but for once, she did not mind. She had something to look forward to now, someone who saw her as more than just the woman behind the bar. The next few days fell into a pattern that made Penelope's heart sing. Lucas came by the saloon almost every evening, sitting at the bar and talking with her between customers. He never stayed too late, always mindful of the long ride back to the ranch. But his presence transformed those hours from drudgery into something she anticipated eagerly. He brought her little gifts, nothing extravagant but thoughtful. A book of poems he had found at the general store, a warm wool scarf because hers was threadbare, a bag of peppermint candies to share. Each gift came with that same earnest expression, as though he genuinely could not help but think of her. The other regulars noticed, of course. Some teased her good-naturedly, while others watched with jealous eyes. Marcus Trent said nothing, but his disapproving glares suggested he did not like his employee attracting the attention of a respectable ranch hand. Penelope ignored them all, protecting this fragile new happiness like a candle flame in the wind. Sunday afternoon arrived cold but clear, the sun bright against the snow. Penelope dressed in her best clothes, wishing again that she had something nicer to wear. But when Lucas arrived right on time, leading a gentle mare he had borrowed from the ranch, his admiring look made her forget her shabby appearance. I thought we could ride out to the ranch, he said, helping her mount. It is too far to walk in this cold, and I want you to see it. Penelope had not been on a horse in years, not since her father had let her ride their old farm horse as a child. But the mare was patient, and Lucas kept their pace easy as they left town behind. The landscape stretched out around them, vast and white and beautiful. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the brilliant blue sky. "Nevada is so different from California," Penelope said, drinking in the view. "Everything feels bigger somehow, like there is more room to breathe." "I felt that way coming from Wyoming," Lucas agreed. "Though I miss the mountains there sometimes. They were closer, more immediate. These feel like they are watching from a distance." The Triple R Ranch appeared gradually, first as distant buildings that grew clearer as they approached. It was larger than Penelope had expected, with a main house, several barns, and a scattering of small cabins for the workers. Cattle dotted the snowy fields, dark shapes against the white. Lucas took her first to the barn, introducing her to the horses he was responsible for training. He moved among them with easy confidence, his voice gentle as he spoke to each one. Penelope watched, fascinated by this side of him. At the saloon, he was charming and attentive. Here, he was completely in his element, every movement purposeful and assured. "This is Copper," he said, stroking the nose of a beautiful chestnut mare. "She is the one I am working with most right now. Skittish but smart. She just needs patience." "She is gorgeous," Penelope breathed, reaching out tentatively to touch the soft muzzle. "She likes you." "Animals always know good people." Lucas smiled at her over the horse's back. "Come on, I will show you my cabin." The cabin was small but well built, with thick walls and a solid roof. Inside, it was sparse but clean, containing a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a stove, and a few shelves for belongings. Lucas had not accumulated much in his years of traveling, but what he had spoke of practicality and quality. "It is not much," he said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "But it is mine. Rutherford built these cabins for his permanent hands, wanting us to have real homes instead of just bunks in the barn." "It is wonderful," Penelope said honestly, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table. "You must be so happy to have your own space." "I am. Though it feels a bit lonely sometimes." He busied himself with lighting the stove. "I made some coffee this morning, real coffee from the beans we bought. Let me heat it up." They sat at his small table, drinking coffee and talking while the stove warmed the cabin. Lucas told her about his work, about the satisfaction of seeing a wild horse learn to trust, about the camaraderie among the ranch hands. Penelope shared more about her life in Humboldt, the challenges and the small victories. "I hate that you spend every holiday working," Lucas said suddenly. "It is not right. There is not much I can do about it. I need the job." "What if you did not?" He leaned forward. "What if you had another option?" Penelope's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I know we have not known each other long, just over a week. But I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are kind and strong and smart, and talking with you is the best part of my day." He took her hands in his. "I am not asking for anything immediate. I just want you to know that I am serious about this, about us. I want to keep seeing you, getting to know you better. And maybe, eventually, if you feel the same way, we could think about a future together." "Lucas, I do feel the same way," Penelope admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "You have made these past days brighter than anything I have experienced in years. But I am scared. What if this is just a moment? What if reality sets in and you realize I am just a saloon girl with nothing to offer? You are so much more than that." He squeezed her hands gently. "You are everything I did not know I was looking for. And yes, we are moving fast. Yes, it is scary. But I would rather take this risk with you than play it safe and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks, but these were different from the tears she had shed on Christmas Eve. These came from hope, from the possibility of happiness she had thought lost forever. "I want that too," she whispered. Lucas stood, pulling her up with him. He cupped her face in his calloused hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Then we will figure it out together. One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations except to be honest with each other. Can you do that?" "Yes." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste forehead kiss from before. This was deep and claiming, full of promise and possibility. Penelope melted into it, her arms wrapping around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she felt fundamentally changed. "I have been wanting to do that for days," Lucas admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "I have been hoping you would." They spent the rest of the afternoon in his cabin, talking and kissing and making tentative plans. Lucas suggested she start looking for other work, something that would give her better hours and more respect. Penelope worried about finding anything, but his confidence bolstered her courage. "Even if it takes time, at least you will be working towards something different," he pointed out, "and I will help however I can." As the sun began to set, Lucas reluctantly took her back to town. At her door, he kissed her once more, long and sweet. "I will come by tomorrow," he promised. "I will be waiting." Penelope climbed to her small room feeling as though she floated. She lay in bed that night, reliving every moment, every word, every touch. For the first time since her parents died, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. The weeks that followed were the happiest Penelope had ever known. Lucas came to see her whenever he could, their relationship deepening with each encounter. They stole moments between her shifts and his work, building something real and lasting. He was true to his word about helping her find other opportunities. Together, they visited shops and restaurants in town, Penelope nervously asking about employment while Lucas waited outside in support. Most places had no openings, but Ingrid Nilsson mentioned that her cousin in Carson City ran a boarding house and was looking for help. "It would mean leaving Humboldt," Penelope said when they discussed it later. "Leaving everything I know." "Would that be so terrible?" Lucas asked gently. "You have told me yourself that you have made no real friends here, that the town feels transient and cold. Maybe a fresh start somewhere else would be good. But what about us? Carson City is 40 miles away. I would follow you." The simple certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. "Penelope, I love you. I think I have loved you since Christmas Eve, watching you pour terrible coffee while trying not to cry. I do not want to be anywhere you are not." Her breath caught. "You love me. I love you." "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer before saying such things, but I do not care. It is the truth." He pulled her close. "You do not have to say it back if you are not ready. But I am ready." Penelope looked up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I love you too, Lucas, so much it scares me sometimes." "Then let it scare us together." He kissed her deeply. "What do you say? Should we take the leap? You could write to Ingrid's cousin, see if the position is still available. If it is, we could both go to Carson City. I know Rutherford would give me a good reference, and there are ranches all around there. We could start fresh, together." It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Penelope thought about her tiny room, her endless shifts at the saloon, the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Then she thought about Lucas, about the future they could build, about holidays spent together instead of apart. "Yes," she said. "Let's do it." They set their plan in motion immediately. Penelope wrote to Ingrid's cousin, Margit, explaining her situation and asking about the position. Lucas spoke with Rutherford, who was disappointed to lose him but understanding. "You found something worth chasing," the old rancher said, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "I respect that. You ever need a reference or a job, you come back here and I will take care of you." The hardest part was telling Marcus Trent. Penelope had been dreading the conversation, knowing he would not take it well. She waited until a slow Tuesday afternoon, when the saloon was empty except for one sleeping drunk in the corner. "I am giving you my notice," she said without preamble. 2 weeks from today will be my last shift." Marcus looked up from the ledger he had been studying, his thin face twisting in annoyance. "You are quitting." "I am. I found another position in Carson City. Another saloon. You will not make more anywhere else. It is a boarding house, actually. Respectable work with reasonable hours." Penelope kept her voice steady. "I am grateful for the job you gave me when I needed it, but it is time for me to move on." "This is about that cowboy, is it not?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You have been different since he showed up. I warned you about getting involved with customers." "My personal life is none of your concern. I have given you fair notice, and I will work my remaining shifts. That is all the law requires." They argued back and forth, Marcus alternating between anger and attempts at guilt-tripping. Penelope held firm, her resolve strengthened by knowing Lucas was waiting outside. Finally, Marcus waved her away in disgust. "Fine. Go. But do not come crawling back when this falls apart and you are alone again." Penelope walked out with her head high, even though her hands shook. Lucas pulled her into his arms immediately. "How did it go?" As well as could be expected. "He was angry, but I did it." She pressed her face against his chest. "I am really leaving." "We are really leaving," Lucas corrected. "Together." A week later, Margit's response arrived. The position was still available, room and board included along with a modest wage. It was not much, but it was enough. Penelope cried when she read the letter, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and lingering disbelief that her life could actually be changing. Lucas had also received good news. A ranch just outside Carson City had hired him sight unseen based on Rutherford's glowing recommendation. The pay was comparable, and they provided housing for their hands. Their remaining time in Humboldt passed in a blur of preparations. Penelope worked her final shifts at the saloon, enduring Marcus's cold shoulder and the mixed reactions of regular customers. Some were happy for her, wishing her well. Others seemed resentful, as though her escape highlighted their own stuck situations. She said goodbye to the Hendersons, who had been kind landlords. She packed her meager belongings, everything she owned fitting into 2 small bags. When she looked around her tiny room for the last time, she felt no sadness, only anticipation. Lucas arranged for a wagon to take them to Carson City. On a cold February morning, they loaded their belongings and said their final farewells. Rutherford gave Lucas a warm handshake and slipped Penelope a small purse of coins. "For starting fresh," he said gruffly. "You are taking away my best horse trainer. Figure you earned this." Penelope tried to refuse, but he would not hear of it. She thanked him with tears in her eyes, touched by the unexpected kindness. The journey to Carson City took most of the day, the wagon bouncing along rutted roads through spectacular scenery. Lucas drove while Penelope sat beside him, watching Nevada unfold around them. Mountains rose in the distance and the desert stretched out in shades of brown and gold under the winter sky. "Are you nervous?" Lucas asked as they neared the city. "Terrified," Penelope admitted. "But excited too. Is that strange?" "Not at all. I feel the same way." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Carson City was larger than Humboldt, more established and prosperous. The boarding house where Penelope would work was a solid 2-story building on a quiet street, well-maintained and welcoming. Margit proved to be as warm as her cousin Ingrid, greeting them with genuine enthusiasm. "I am so glad you came," she said, showing Penelope to a pleasant room on the second floor. "I have been running this place alone since my husband died last year. I need someone reliable, and Ingrid spoke highly of you." The room was twice the size of Penelope's old one, with real curtains on the window and a comfortable bed. She stood in the middle of it, turning slowly, hardly able to believe this was hers. Lucas's new ranch was 3 miles outside the city, but he came to see her every Sunday, his day off. They spent those precious hours walking through town, talking about their new lives and their hopes for the future. The work at the boarding house was demanding but satisfying. Penelope cooked and cleaned and managed the guests, using skills she had honed over years of hard work. Margit treated her with respect, valuing her opinions and paying her fairly. For the first time in years, Penelope had holidays off. When Easter Sunday arrived in April, she attended church with Lucas, then spent the afternoon at a picnic he had arranged outside of town. Sitting on a blanket under budding trees, eating bread and cheese and watching clouds drift across the endless sky, Penelope felt peace settle into her bones. "I never thought I could be this happy," she told Lucas, leaning against his shoulder. "Get used to it." He kissed the top of her head. "This is just the beginning." As spring turned to summer, their relationship continued to deepen. Lucas was steady and dependable, showing up when he said he would and following through on every promise. He made her laugh with stories from the ranch and listened intently when she talked about her day. The physical attraction between them remained strong, but they were both careful to maintain propriety, aware of how much they had to lose if scandal touched them. In June, Lucas took her to meet some of his fellow ranch hands at a small celebration in town. Penelope was nervous about being accepted, her past as a saloon worker still a source of shame. But Lucas never wavered in his support, introducing her proudly to everyone they met. The men were rough but kind, and their wives, understanding the challenges of Western life, welcomed her without judgment. One warm July evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun set over the mountains, Lucas took her hand. "I have been thinking," he began, suddenly seeming nervous in a way she rarely saw from him. "About us, about our future." Penelope's heart began to race. "What about it? I love you more every day. You are my best friend, my confidant, the person I want to tell everything to. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He shifted, and suddenly he was kneeling on the porch, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Penelope Nash, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She gasped as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small but beautiful stone catching the dying light. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up passion they had been carefully restraining. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Penelope looked at the ring on her hand and felt like she was dreaming. "Where did you get this? It must have cost a fortune." "I have been saving every spare penny since we arrived in Carson City. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows how serious I am about forever." He cupped her face in his hands. "You deserve everything, Penelope. I may not be able to give you that, but I will spend the rest of my life trying." "You already give me everything that matters," she whispered. They set the wedding date for September, wanting to give themselves time to prepare but not willing to wait longer than necessary. Margit was thrilled, offering to host the reception at the boarding house. The wives of Lucas's fellow ranch hands rallied around Penelope, helping her make a simple but beautiful dress and plan the celebration. Penelope wrote to the Nilssons in Humboldt, inviting them to attend. Anders wrote back with enthusiastic congratulations and regrets that they could not make the journey, but enclosed a generous monetary gift. Even old Rutherford sent a package containing a beautiful quilt for their future home. The only shadow on Penelope's happiness was the absence of her parents. She wished desperately that they could be there to see her marry such a good man, to know that she had found her way after all the struggles. The night before the wedding, she sat alone in her room, holding the faded quilt her mother had made and letting herself cry. Lucas found her there, knocking softly before entering. He did not say anything, just sat beside her and pulled her into his arms, letting her grieve. When her tears finally subsided, he spoke quietly. "They would be proud of you, proud of the woman you have become, of the strength you have shown. And they would be happy that you found someone to love who loves you just as much in return. How do you always know the right thing to say? I do not, usually. I just say what is in my heart and hope it helps." He kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow we start our life together. Are you ready?" "I have never been more ready for anything." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the September air crisp with the promise of fall. Penelope dressed with shaking hands, helped by Margit and two of the ranch wives. The simple white dress fit her perfectly, the lace at the collar borrowed from one of the women. She wore her hair down, decorated with wildflowers Lucas had picked from the meadow near his ranch. The ceremony took place in the small church, attended by the small community they had built around themselves. When Penelope walked down the aisle and saw Lucas waiting at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears, she felt every struggle of the past years fall away. This moment, this man, this love, made it all worthwhile. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Penelope listened to the familiar words with her whole heart. When it came time for vows, Lucas took her hands and spoke with unwavering certainty. "I promise to love you in all circumstances, to celebrate with you on good days and support you through difficult ones. I promise to make every day special, to never let you feel alone or forgotten. You are my home, Penelope, and I will spend my life making sure you always know how cherished you are." Penelope's voice shook as she made her own vows. "I promise to trust you with my heart, to build a life with you based on honesty and partnership. You showed me that love does not have to be earned through suffering, that happiness is not selfish. You made me believe in myself again, and I will love you until my last breath. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Lucas kissed her to the sound of cheering friends. The reception at the boarding house was simple but joyful, full of food and music and laughter. Margit had outdone herself with the meal, and someone had brought a fiddle, filling the evening with dancing. Penelope danced with Lucas until her feet ached, feeling lighter than air in his arms. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Lucas pulled her aside. "I have a surprise for you. Another one. You have given me too much already. This is special." He led her outside where a small wagon waited, loaded with their combined belongings. "I spoke with the ranch owner last month. There is a small cabin on the property, usually reserved for married hands. It is ours if we want it starting tonight. Our own home." Penelope could hardly believe it. "Our own home. Nothing fancy, but it is ours. What do you say, Mrs. Vaughn, ready to start our life together?" She loved the sound of her new name, the way it connected her to him permanently. "Take me home." The cabin was indeed small, just 3 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy with a good stove and windows that let in plenty of light. Someone, probably Lucas, had stocked the shelves with basic supplies and left wildflowers in a jar on the table. A large bed dominated the bedroom, covered in Rutherford's beautiful quilt. Lucas carried Penelope over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. He set her down gently, then just held her, his arms wrapped tight around her waist. "This is real," he murmured against her hair. "You are really my wife." "I am really your wife," she confirmed, tilting her face up to kiss him. "I love you so much, Lucas. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, exploring each other without shame or hesitation. Lucas was gentle but ardent, patient with her inexperience and attentive to her responses. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Penelope felt complete in a way she never had before. "That was perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect. Not perfect, but yours. Always yours." Lucas kissed her shoulder, then pulled the quilt over them. "Sleep, my love. We have a whole lifetime of nights like this ahead of us." The following months were an adjustment as they learned to live together, to navigate the rhythms of married life. Lucas worked long hours at the ranch, coming home tired and dusty each evening. Penelope kept their home clean and cozy, learning to cook the meals he preferred and managing their modest household budget. But true to his vow, Lucas made sure every day held something special. He left her little notes before riding out in the mornings, simple messages of love that made her smile. He brought her wildflowers from the fields and interesting rocks he found on the range. On Sundays, they explored the area together, finding new trails and quiet spots that became their private places. When holidays approached, Penelope felt the old anxiety begin to creep in. But Lucas had not forgotten the promise implicit in his actions that first Christmas. For Thanksgiving, he arranged with his boss to take the entire day off, a rarity for ranch work. They spent it alone in their cabin, cooking a small turkey together and making a mess of their attempts at pie. It did not matter that the food was imperfect or that they had no guests. What mattered was that they were together, celebrating rather than working. "This is the best Thanksgiving I have ever had," Penelope declared over their lopsided dessert. "Just wait until Christmas," Lucas promised with a grin. He delivered on that promise too. Christmas of 1883 was everything the previous year had not been. They attended church together, then came home to a cabin Lucas had decorated with pine branches and candles. He had bought her small but thoughtful gifts, nothing extravagant but each one showing how well he knew her. A new book of poetry, soft gloves to replace her worn ones, a music box that played a sweet melody when wound. Penelope had saved to buy him things as well. A new hat to replace his battered one, thick socks hand-knitted through many evenings, a carved picture frame holding a photograph they had taken in town, the two of them looking stiff and formal but unmistakably happy. They spent the day cooking together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses. As the sun set, they lay together on their bed, wrapped in each other's arms and Rutherford's quilt. "You remember last Christmas?" Lucas asked softly. "When I walked into that saloon and saw you looking so sad?" "I remember. I thought it would be another miserable holiday alone. Then you appeared like some kind of Christmas miracle. I was the lucky one. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her deeply. "And look at us now, married in our own home together. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You made every promise come true," Penelope said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "You said you would make every day a celebration, and you have. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but by being present, by choosing me every single day. That is the greatest gift anyone could give. I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life. That is one promise you can count on forever." Winter passed into spring, and with it came news that changed everything. Penelope had been feeling unwell for weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings. When she finally confided in one of the ranch wives, the older woman laughed knowingly. "Honey, you are expecting. I would bet my best skillet on it." The confirmation from the doctor in Carson City filled Penelope with a mixture of joy and terror. A baby. She was going to be a mother. The news overwhelmed her, bringing back memories of her own mother and fears about whether she could live up to that legacy. Lucas's reaction left no room for doubt. When she told him that evening, stumbling over the words in her nervousness, his face transformed with pure wonder. A baby. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby. Lucas, put me down before you drop me." He set her down gently, immediately apologetic. "Sorry, I am just so happy. Are you happy? I know we did not plan this so soon, but—" "I am terrified," Penelope admitted. "But yes, I am happy. We are going to be parents. You are going to be an amazing mother." Lucas knelt and placed his hands on her still, flat stomach. "And this baby is the luckiest child in the world to have you." The pregnancy progressed well, despite Penelope's fears. Lucas hovered anxiously, trying to do everything for her until she had to gently remind him that she was pregnant, not broken. The ranch wives rallied around her again, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and stories meant to prepare her for what was coming. As her belly grew, Lucas took to talking to it every evening, telling their unborn child stories about his day and making elaborate plans for their future. Penelope would lie there, running her fingers through his hair, feeling more loved than she had thought possible. "What should we name the baby?" she asked one night as they lay in bed, Lucas's hand resting on her rounded stomach. "I have been thinking about that. If it is a boy, maybe James, after my brother. I know we had our differences, but I think it would be a good way to honor that bond despite everything. And if it is a girl, that is up to you. Maybe something that reminds you of your mother," Penelope considered. Her name was Catherine. "We could call her Catherine, or maybe Catherine Rose. My mother loved roses. Catherine Rose Vaughn. That is beautiful." Lucas kissed her belly. "What do you think, little one? Do you like that name?" the baby kicked in response, making them both laugh with delight. Their son arrived in late August during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and flooded the roads. The labor was long and difficult, leaving Penelope exhausted and Lucas pale with worry. But when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Penelope's arms, every moment of pain vanished. "He is perfect," she breathed, examining tiny fingers and toes. "Lucas, look at him. He is perfect." Lucas sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Penelope's shoulders, staring at his son with awe. "What are we going to call him?" "James, like we talked about." Penelope looked at the baby, then at her husband. "I was thinking maybe Lucas James, after his father and your brother." "What do you think?" "I think that is perfect." Lucas's voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you, for him, for you, for this life. I do not know what I did to deserve it all, but I am grateful every single day." Little Lucas James proved to be a demanding baby, waking frequently at night and crying with impressive lung power. Penelope, exhausted from the constant care, sometimes felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her new responsibility. But Lucas was there every step of the way, walking the floor with their son in the middle of the night so she could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and never making her feel alone in the challenge. "This is partnership," he told her one particularly difficult evening when the baby would not stop crying. "We are in this together, always." As fall arrived and their son began to settle into a routine, Penelope found moments to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this place. Just 2 years ago, she had been alone in a Humboldt saloon on Christmas Eve, convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. Now she sat in her own home, her husband beside her and their son asleep in the cradle Lucas had built, and felt such profound gratitude it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her expression. "Just how different everything is now. How you changed my entire life that Christmas Eve. You changed mine too. I was drifting, alone, not sure what I was looking for. Then I saw you and everything clicked into place." He pulled her close. "You were worth every mile I wandered, every lonely night before I found you." The following Christmas was chaotic in the best possible way. Lucas James was 4 months old, grabbing at everything within reach and requiring constant supervision. They could not attend church because the baby was fussy, and their planned dinner burned while they dealt with a diaper emergency. But none of that mattered. Lucas had decorated the cabin again, and they opened small gifts while the baby played on a blanket between them. The gifts were simpler this year, money tight after the expenses of a new baby, but each one was given with love. They ate their salvaged dinner, and Lucas made Penelope laugh with exaggerated stories about the ranch. As evening fell and they sat together by the stove, their son nursing contentedly, Penelope looked around their small home and felt complete. This was not the life she had imagined as a girl in California, but it was better than any fantasy. It was real and messy and challenging and perfect. "Merry Christmas, my love," Lucas said softly, kissing her temple. "Merry Christmas, and thank you." "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For making every day a celebration, not just the holidays. For showing me that love is something steady and constant, not just grand gestures on special occasions. That is easy when you are loving the right person." Lucas looked at their son, then at her. "You and Lucas James are my world. Everything I do, every day, is a celebration of that fact." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Money remained tight, requiring careful budgeting and sacrifice. Lucas James grew into a rambunctious toddler who kept them constantly on their toes. Lucas's work at the ranch was demanding, and there were seasons when he came home too exhausted for anything but sleep. Penelope sometimes felt the isolation of being home alone with a small child while her husband worked long hours. But through it all, Lucas's essential nature never changed. He still left her notes in the mornings. He still brought her wildflowers and interesting rocks. He still made sure they found time together, even if it was just sitting on their porch after the baby was asleep, holding hands and watching the stars. He still made holidays special, refusing to let them pass without some kind of celebration. No matter how tired or busy they were, when Lucas James was 2 years old, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This time the news brought less fear and more anticipation. They knew what to expect now, knew they could handle the sleepless nights and constant demands of an infant. Their daughter, Catherine Rose, arrived in spring with far less drama than her brother. She was a calm baby, watching the world with solemn dark eyes and crying only when she truly needed something. Lucas James was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. "We have a family," Penelope marveled one evening, watching Lucas play with both children. "A real family. We certainly do." Lucas looked up at her with that same love that had never dimmed. "Think we can handle more, maybe eventually. Let me recover from this one first." She laughed, but the idea did not seem impossible. Despite the challenges, she loved being a mother, loved the noise and chaos and constant activity that filled their small cabin. Over the next years, they added 2 more children to their family. Another son, Samuel, arrived when Catherine was 3. 2 years after that came their youngest, a daughter they named Iris. 4 children felt like a perfectly complete family, their cabin bursting at the seams but full of laughter and love. Lucas had been promoted over the years. now serving as the ranch foreman with increased responsibilities and better pay. The raise allowed them to add a room onto their cabin, giving the children more space and Penelope a proper kitchen. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they were comfortable, able to meet their needs with a little left over for occasional treats. Holidays became major productions with 4 children, each one bringing their own excitement and demands. Lucas threw himself into making every celebration special, organizing games and surprises, telling stories and making traditions that the children would remember forever. He taught the boys to ride and helped the girls with their reading, always patient, always present. Penelope watched him be the father to their children that he had never had himself, breaking cycles and building something new. She saw the way the children adored him, running to greet him when he came home each evening, fighting over who got to sit on his lap. She saw the man who had wandered into her saloon on Christmas Eve and changed everything, and her love for him only grew deeper. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised her with a picnic at the same spot where they had celebrated Easter all those years ago. His mother had agreed to watch the children, giving them a rare day alone. They rode out together on horses, moving through landscape made familiar through a decade of exploring. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Penelope asked, unpacking the basket she had prepared. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like I have known you my whole life." Lucas lay back on the blanket, pulling her down beside him. "Have you been happy? I know it has not always been easy." "The happiest? Yes, it has been hard sometimes. Money gets tight, the children are exhausting, we do not get enough time alone. But I would not trade a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. You did the same for me. I was so lost before you, Penelope. Just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You made me want to be better, to build something that mattered." He turned to face her, his hand cupping her cheek in that familiar gesture. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you impossibly much then. I love you too, forever and always." They made love there under the open sky, unhurried and tender, reaffirming bonds that had only strengthened through years of partnership. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about memories and dreams, about their children and their hopes for the future. "Do you ever think about Humboldt?" Lucas asked. "About that Christmas Eve when we met? Sometimes. It feels like a different lifetime. I was so alone then, so convinced that I would always be on the outside looking in at other people's happiness." Penelope traced patterns on his chest. "Then you walked through that door and everything changed. You saw me when I felt invisible. You chose me when I felt worthless. You gave me reasons to celebrate when I thought I would spend every holiday alone. You were never invisible or worthless. You just needed someone to reflect back what you could not see in yourself." Lucas kissed her forehead. "I am glad it was me. Glad I got to be the one who got to love you." As the sun began to set, they packed up reluctantly and rode back toward home and children and the beautiful chaos of their life together. Penelope looked over at Lucas riding beside her, his profile strong against the fading light, and felt such contentment it threatened to overwhelm her. The children were already in bed when they arrived, worn out from their day with grandmother. They checked on each one, pulling up blankets and brushing hair from sleeping faces. In the room the boys shared, Lucas James, now 11, had sprawled across his entire bed, while 6-year-old Samuel was curled in a tight ball. In the girls' room, 8-year-old Catherine had her arm around 4-year-old Iris, both sleeping peacefully. "We made these amazing humans," Penelope whispered in wonder. "You made them. I just helped." Lucas pulled her close. "Come on, let's go to bed. I am exhausted." They settled into their own bed, the one they had shared for 10 years, worn, familiar with use but still solid. Lucas wrapped his arms around Penelope and she fit against him perfectly, their bodies knowing exactly how to align. "Thank you for today," she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. "Thank you for every day, past, present, and future." Lucas kissed her hair. "Sleep well, my love." The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and struggle. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Lucas James showed aptitude with horses like his father, already helping at the ranch on weekends. Catherine loved books, reading everything she could get her hands on and making up elaborate stories. Samuel was their adventurer, constantly coming home muddy and scraped from exploring. Little Iris was still discovering herself, but showed signs of artistic talent, drawing pictures that covered every available surface. Lucas Sr. continued advancing at the ranch, his hard work and dedication recognized and rewarded. When the owner, now elderly, decided to sell, he offered Lucas the chance to buy into a partnership with two other longtime hands. It required taking out a significant loan, but it meant stability and equity, a chance to build real wealth for their family. "It is risky," Lucas admitted when they discussed it. "If something goes wrong, we could lose everything. But if it goes right, we could give the children opportunities we never had." Penelope had learned over the years to trust her husband's judgment. "I believe in you. If you think we can do this, then let's do it." They took the risk, and it paid off. The ranch thrived under the new partnership's management, and within 5 years, Lucas's share provided more financial security than they had ever known. They were able to improve their home, adding more rooms and modern conveniences. They could afford better clothes for the children, proper medical care, even small luxuries like store-bought toys at Christmas. But despite the improved circumstances, Lucas never lost sight of what mattered. He still made time for individual attention with each child, still left notes for Penelope, still made every holiday special. If anything, success made him more determined to stay grounded, to remember what it felt like to have nothing and be grateful for everything. Their children grew into young adults who made them proud. Lucas James took naturally to ranch work, becoming his father's right hand and eventually a partner himself. Catherine became a teacher at the local school, sharing her love of learning with a new generation. Samuel headed west to California, finding work with the railroad and writing long letters about his adventures. Iris married a kind young man from town and settled nearby, giving them their first grandchild. As Penelope held her grandson for the first time, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From an orphaned girl working in a saloon to a grandmother surrounded by family and love, the transformation seemed almost impossible. Yet it had happened one day at a time, built on the foundation Lucas had established that long ago Christmas Eve. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, now in his 50s but still strong and vital, his hair gray but his eyes still that same clear blue. "How grateful I am. For you, for our life, for all of it." Penelope looked at their assembled family, children and grandchildren filling their home with noise and laughter. "You made good on every promise, Lucas. You made every day a celebration. It was easy when I had you to celebrate." He pulled her close, heedless of their audience. "Best decision I ever made, walking into that saloon. Best decision I ever made was believing you when you said things could be different." On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Their children had planned everything, decorating the ranch house and preparing an enormous feast. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, the party lasting well into the night. As the festivities wound down and guests began departing, Penelope and Lucas slipped away to their favorite spot, the same meadow where they had picnicked so many times over the years. The September night was cool but pleasant, stars brilliant overhead. 25 years, Penelope said wonderingly. A quarter century. When did we get so old? Speak for yourself. I am as young as ever. Lucas pulled her onto his lap, proving his point by kissing her with undiminished passion. And I still love you as much as that first Christmas. More even. More, Penelope agreed. Because now I know all of you. Your strength and your weaknesses, your good days and bad days, everything that makes you who you are. And I love every bit of it. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sound of the next generation carrying on. You have any regrets? Lucas asked suddenly. Anything you wish had been different, Penelope considered seriously before answering. I wish I could have had this life and still had my parents to share it with. I wish we had not struggled quite so much financially in those early years. But regret? No. Every challenge brought us closer, made us stronger. I would not change our story. Good, because I feel the same way. Lucas tightened his arms around her. Though I do wish I had found you sooner. Think of all the years we missed together. We found each other when we were meant to, not a moment too soon or too late. Penelope turned to kiss him, and we will have many more years ahead. You are not getting rid of me that easily. I would never want to. You are stuck with me forever, Mrs. Vaughn. They stayed in the meadow until the cool drove them back inside, where their family waited with cake and more stories. As Penelope cut the anniversary cake, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the friends who had become family over the years, she caught Lucas's eye across the room. He winked at her, that familiar gesture that never failed to make her heart flutter, and she smiled back, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes of aging. Lucas's hair went completely silver, and his back bothered him on cold mornings. Penelope developed arthritis in her hands, making fine work difficult. But they adapted together, supporting each other through each new challenge. They watched with pride and occasional heartache as their children navigated their own lives. Lucas James and his wife gave them 3 more grandchildren. Catherine married later in life, a fellow teacher who adored her completely. Samuel eventually returned from California, settling in Carson City with a wife and 2 children. Iris had 4 children in rapid succession, keeping her parents busy with babysitting and support. Christmas remained their favorite holiday, though it looked different now with so many people involved. The family rotated hosting duties, but everyone made sure Penelope and Lucas were at the center of the celebration. The grandchildren loved hearing stories about how their grandparents met, begging for the tale every year. Tell us again about the terrible coffee, the eldest grandson would demand. And how Grandpa brought cookies, one of the girls would add. Lucas and Penelope would exchange amused glances before launching into the familiar story, embellishing slightly for drama but keeping the essential truth intact. How he had walked into a saloon on Christmas Eve and found her working alone. How he had come back the next day with gifts and kindness. How he had promised to make every day a celebration, and how he had kept that promise for more than 30 years. The secret, Lucas would tell them seriously, is that you do not save love for special occasions. You give it every single day in small ways and big ways. That is what makes life worth living. The grandchildren would nod solemnly, not fully understanding but absorbing the lesson nonetheless. Penelope would watch Lucas with these young ones, seeing echoes of the man who had first captured her heart, and fall in love with him all over again. On their 40th anniversary, they held a quieter celebration, just immediate family at the ranch house. Penelope was 70 now, Lucas 72, and they tired more easily. But the love between them remained as vibrant as ever, visible in every glance and touch. After dinner, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Penelope leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first Christmas, about making every day a celebration, of course? One of the truest things I have ever said. You kept that promise. For 40 years, you made every single day feel special. Even the hard days, the days when money was tight or the children were difficult or we were exhausted, you found ways to make me feel loved and valued." Penelope's voice wavered with emotion. "That is the greatest gift anyone could give. Not grand gestures on holidays, but consistent, steady love every ordinary day. That was never work, Penelope. Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done." Lucas kissed her temple. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. We saved each other. We did not we?" She smiled through happy tears. Two lost souls who found each other on Christmas Eve and built something beautiful. They sat in peaceful silence as darkness fell around them, comfortable in the way only people who have shared 4 decades together can be. Inside, their children and grandchildren cleaned up dinner and prepared to head home, giving the elderly couple a few moments of privacy. Lucas James eventually came out to say goodbye, looking at his parents with affection and concern. "You two all right out here? It is getting cold." "We are fine," Lucas assured him, "just enjoying the evening." "You look just like your father did when I met him," Penelope told her son. "Sometimes I look at you and I am 22 again, seeing him for the first time in that saloon." Lucas James grinned. "High praise, considering how it worked out. I hope my kids tell stories about Anne and me like that someday." "Just love her every day," Lucas advised. "Make the ordinary days special and the special days will take care of themselves." After everyone left, Penelope and Lucas made their way slowly to bed, moving with the careful deliberation of age. They had added modern conveniences to the house over the years, including indoor plumbing and electric lights, but their bedroom remained essentially the same. The same bed they had shared for 40 years, only the mattress replaced. The same quilt from Rutherford, worn thin but carefully mended. The same sense of peace and belonging. "I am tired," Penelope admitted as they settled under the covers. "So wonderfully tired." "Then sleep, my love." Lucas pulled her close, her head on his chest where she could hear his steady heartbeat. "I am right here." "Always right here," Penelope murmured, already drifting. "That is all I have ever needed." The following years brought the inevitable losses that come with age. Friends passed away, old companions who had shared their journey. Lucas's health began to fail, his heart growing weak. Penelope nursed him through several scares, refusing to leave his side, their roles reversed from the early days when he had been her constant support. But even facing his own mortality, Lucas maintained his spirit. On their 45th anniversary, too weak to go out, he had their children bring the celebration to them. From his bed, he toasted Penelope with water instead of wine, his hand shaking but his love unwavering. 45 years with the love of my life, he said to the assembled family. Not long enough, but what we got was perfect. I would not trade a single day. Penelope held his hand, tears streaming down her face. Neither would I, not one single day. Lucas passed away peacefully the following spring, surrounded by family with Penelope holding his hand. His last words were for her. Every day with you was a celebration. I love you, always. The grief was crushing, but Penelope found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together. She remained in their home on the ranch, cared for by family but still independent. She tended a small garden and read to her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the legacy of love he had left behind. On what would have been their 50th anniversary, the family gathered again, this time at Lucas's grave. They shared memories and tears and laughter, celebrating the man who had touched so many lives. When everyone else had left, Penelope stayed behind, sitting on the ground beside his headstone despite her aching joints. 50 years since we got married, she told him, tracing the carved letters of his name. 47 Christmases together. So many days, both ordinary and special, all made better because you were in them. You kept your promise, my love. You made every single day a celebration, right up to your last breath. The wind rustled through the grass, and Penelope chose to believe it was his answer. She stayed a while longer, remembering, before letting her youngest grandson help her to her feet and drive her home. Penelope lived another 5 years after Lucas, seeing the family continue to grow and thrive. She met great-great-grandchildren, taught the younger generation her recipes and stories, and maintained the home she and Lucas had built with such care. She pressed wildflowers in books of poetry, leaving them with notes about which meadow they came from and which anniversary they marked. On her final Christmas Eve, now 80 years old, Penelope sat surrounded by family in the ranch house that had been expanded and modernized, but still felt like the small cabin where she and Lucas had started. The great-grandchildren begged for the story, the one they had heard so many times but never tired of hearing. "Tell us how you and great-grandpa met," they pleaded, so Penelope told them one last time. About the lonely saloon on Christmas Eve in 1882, about a young cowboy with blue eyes who had walked in from the snow, about terrible coffee and good cookies, about someone seeing her when she felt invisible, about a promise to make every day a celebration and a lifetime of that promise being kept. "The most important thing," she told them, her voice still strong despite her years, "is that love is not about grand gestures on holidays. It is about showing up every single day in small ways and big ways. It is about making the ordinary days feel special. That is what your great-grandfather taught me, and it is the greatest gift I can pass on to you." The children listened with wide eyes, absorbing the lesson. Penelope looked around at all the faces, seeing Lucas in some of them, seeing herself in others, seeing the beautiful blending of their love echoed through generations. This was their legacy, she thought with satisfaction. Not wealth or fame, but love that continued to ripple outward, touching lives that had not even been born when it all began. That night, Penelope went to sleep in her familiar bed and did not wake up. The family mourned deeply, but also celebrated, knowing she had lived a full and happy life, that she had gotten everything she ever wanted and more. They buried her beside Lucas, reuniting them in death as they had been inseparable in life. On Penelope's headstone, beneath her name and dates, her children added an inscription suggested by Lucas James. "She taught us that every day is worth celebrating." Beside Lucas's existing stone, it created a complete message. His read, "He made every day a celebration." Hers, "She taught us that every day is worth celebrating, together, even in death." Years later, when descendants visited those graves, they would tell the story to their own children, about a lonely woman working in a saloon on Christmas Eve while others celebrated, about a cowboy who had walked in from the cold and changed everything, about a promise kept for nearly 50 years to make every ordinary day feel special, about love that had built something lasting, that continued to influence lives more than a century after it began. The story became family legend, told and retold, embellished and remembered. but the essential truth remained unchanged. Lucas and Penelope had found each other when both were lost. They had built a life based on showing up for each other every single day, not just on holidays or special occasions. They had created a love that weathered every storm and celebrated every small joy. They had proven that the greatest romance is not found in dramatic moments, but in choosing each other, again and again, through all the ordinary days that make up a life. And on Christmas Eves, when their descendants gathered to celebrate, someone would always raise a glass and toast to the couple who started it all. To Lucas, who had kept his promise to make every day a celebration, and to Penelope, who had believed him and built a beautiful life as a result. Their love story, which began with loneliness and ended with legacy, continued to inspire and guide generations, a testament to the power of showing up, of staying present, of celebrating the everyday moments that ultimately matter most. The end.